All stories posted on our channel are stories from our subscribers and created by us based on real events we've experienced and witnessed. We post new stories every day for your entertainment that we hope you enjoy them. Thank you.
I remember the exact moment everything changed between us. It was a Thursday evening in late October, and the autumn wind was rattling the windows of our home in Portland. I had just come home from another exhausting 12-hour shift at the architecture I had worked for the past 11. My briefcase felt heavier than usual as I set it down by the door, and the silence of the house wrapped around me like a familiar but unwelcome blanket. My name is Garrett Holloway, and I am 43 years old. I have been married to my wife Corinne for 15 years. We met at a friend's barbecue back when life still felt full of possibilities, when dreams were something you chased rather than something you mourned. She was radiant back then, with auburn hair that caught the sunlight and a laugh that made everyone around her feel alive. I fell in love with her within the first hour of our meeting, and I spent the next 6 months convincing her that I was worth taking a chance on. For the first 7 years of our marriage, I believed we had something special. We bought this house together, a modest 3-bedroom colonial with a wraparound porch that Corinne had always dreamed of. We talked about having children, about growing old together, about all the adventures we would share. But somewhere along the way, those conversations faded into silence, and the adventures became routine trips to the grocery store and obligatory visits to her parents in Seattle. That Thursday evening, I found Corinne sitting at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea that had long gone cold. She looked up when I entered, and I noticed something different in her, a calculation that I had never seen before, or perhaps had simply refused to acknowledge. "We need to talk," she said. And those 4 words carried the weight of everything that had been building between us for years. I sat down across from her, loosening my tie with fingers that suddenly felt clumsy. "What's on your mind?" I asked, though part of me already knew. We had been dancing around this conversation for months, maybe longer. The distance between us had grown so vast that we might as well have been living in separate houses. Corinne took a deep breath, and I watched her compose herself in that deliberate way she had perfected over years. "I know things haven't been good between us," she began, her voice steady, but her eyes avoiding mine. "I know you've been unhappy. I've been unhappy too, Garrett, but I've been thinking about what we could do to fix this, to save our marriage." I waited, saying nothing. In my experience, silence often reveals more than words ever could. "I want to make you an offer," she continued, finally meeting my gaze. "I know that one of the biggest issues between us has been intimacy. I know I've been distant, that I've pushed you away more times than I can count. So here's what I'm proposing. Intimacy whenever you want. No more excuses, no more headaches, no more turning away from you in bed. Whenever you want me, I'll be available. I'm willing to do that for our marriage." I sat there in stunned silence, processing her words. On the surface, it might have seemed like a generous offer, a wife willing to sacrifice her own comfort to save her relationship. But as I turned her proposition over in my mind, I felt something cold settle in my chest. A recognition of what her words truly were. She was offering me her body as a transaction, a bargaining chip to maintain the comfortable life we had built together. Not once in her carefully rehearsed speech did she mention love. Not once did she speak of wanting to reconnect with me emotionally, of missing the conversations we used to have, of longing for the partnership we had lost. She was offering me access to her physical form while keeping her heart locked away in a fortress I could never breach. I thought about the past 3 years, about the countless nights I had reached for her only to be met with excuses and cold shoulders. I thought about the way she had stopped asking about my day, about my dreams, about the things that kept me awake at night. I remembered the last time she had truly laughed at one of my jokes, and I realized with a sinking feeling that I could not pinpoint when that moment had occurred. The intimacy she was offering was not what I craved. I did not want a wife who submitted to me out of obligation. I wanted a partner who desired me, who chose me, who woke up every morning grateful that we had found each other. I wanted the woman I had married, the one who used to leave love notes in my briefcase and surprise me with weekend trips to the coast. That woman had vanished somewhere along the way, replaced by this stranger who thought she could save our marriage with the promise of physical availability. "Corinne," I said slowly, choosing my words with care. "I appreciate that you're trying to find a solution, but I don't think this is the answer we need." Her eyes narrowed slightly, a flicker of frustration crossing her features. "What do you mean?" "I'm offering you exactly what you've been complaining about for years. I'm willing to change, Garrett. Isn't that what you wanted?" "What I wanted," I replied, feeling the truth of the words as I spoke them, "was for you to want me, not to tolerate me, not to accommodate me like some kind of household chore. I wanted you to look at me the way you used to, like I was the most important person in your world. When did that stop, Corinne? When did I become just another item on your to-do list?" She opened her mouth to respond, but I held up my hand. The words were flowing now, years of suppressed pain finding their way to the surface. I've spent the last 3 years trying to figure out what I did wrong, I continue. I've asked you countless times what was bothering you, what I could do to make things better, and every time you told me everything was fine, that I was imagining, but everything wasn't fine, was it? You checked out of this marriage years ago, and I've been living with a ghost who shares my bed but won't share her heart. Corinne's face had gone pale, and I could see her composure beginning to crack. That's not fair, she whispered. I've been here, haven't I? I've cooked your meals, kept this house running, supported your career. You've fulfilled your contractual obligations, I interrupted, and I heard the bitterness in my own voice. You've done everything a wife is supposed to do on paper, but marriage isn't a contract. It's supposed to be a partnership, a union of two people who genuinely want to build a life together. And somewhere along the way, you stopped wanting them. You stopped wanting me. The silence that followed was deafening. I could hear the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway, a wedding gift from her parents that had marked the passage of every moment of our married life. In that silence, I made a decision that I had been avoiding for longer than I cared to admit. I think we should get a divorce, I said, and the words hung in the air between us like a declaration of war. The reaction was instantaneous and more violent than I had anticipated. Corinne's composure shattered like glass hitting concrete, and suddenly she was on her feet, the cold tea spilling across the table as she knocked over her cup. Her face contorted through a rapid succession of emotions: shock, disbelief, fear, and finally, a fury that I had never seen in all our years together. "Divorce?" she screamed, her voice rising to a pitch that made me wince. "I offer to give you everything you've been asking for, and your response is to throw away 15 years of marriage? Are you out of your mind, Garrett?" I remained seated, keeping my voice calm despite the storm erupting before me. "I'm not throwing anything away, Corinne. I'm acknowledging what's already gone. This marriage has been dead for years. We've just been too afraid to bury it." "No," she said, shaking her head vehemently. "No, you don't get to do this. You don't get to sit there and act like you're the victim when I just offered to save our marriage. Do you have any idea what it cost me to make that offer? To swallow my pride and admit that I haven't been the wife you need?" I studied her face, searching for any sign of genuine remorse, any indication that she understood the depth of the problem. But all I saw was wounded pride, and the panic of someone watching their comfortable life slip away. "What did it cost you, Corinne?" I asked quietly, because from where I'm sitting, it didn't cost you anything at all. You offered me physical access while keeping emotional intimacy off the table. You didn't offer to go to counseling with me. You didn't offer to have honest conversations about what went wrong between us. You didn't offer to fall in love with me again. You offered me the one thing that would require the least amount of effort from you while making it look like you were making a grand sacrifice. Her mouth opened and closed several times, but no words came out. I could see the wheels turning in her mind, trying to formulate a defense against an accusation she knew was true. "That's not fair," she finally managed, her voice barely above a whisper. You were trying to maintain the status quo," I said, cutting her. "You were trying to keep the house, the lifestyle, the social status of being married to a successful architect. You weren't trying to save our marriage, Corinne. You were trying to save your position." The accusation landed like a physical blow, and I watched her stagger back as if I had struck her. Part of me felt guilty for being so harsh, but a larger part of me was tired. Tired of pretending, tired of hoping for change that would never come, tired of being married to a woman who saw me as a means to an end, rather than a partner in life. "How can you say that?" she demanded, tears beginning to stream down her face. "How can you sit there and accuse me of not loving you? I've given you 15 years of my life, Garrett. 15 years. You've given me 15 years of your presence," I corrected gently. "But presence isn't the same as participation. You've been physically in this marriage, but emotionally, you left a long time ago. And I've spent the last several years trying to convince myself that it was enough, that I should be grateful for what I had. But it's not enough, Corinne. I deserve more than a wife who tolerates me. I deserve someone who actually wants to be with me." She collapsed back into her chair, her body shaking with sobs. In that moment, she looked smaller than I had ever seen her, diminished somehow, as though my words had stripped away all the armor she had built around herself. "You can't do this," she said between sobs. "You can't just throw me away like I'm nothing. I've built my whole life around this marriage, around being your wife. What am I supposed to do if you leave?" There it was. The truth she had been hiding behind her tears and protestations of love. Her primary concern wasn't losing me. It was losing the life she had built around me. The house, the social circle, the identity she had cultivated as the wife of Garrett Holloway. Without those things, she would have to face the reality of who she was as an individual, and that prospect terrified her more than the thought of losing her husband. "Maybe that's part of the problem," I said softly. "You've spent so long being my wife that you've forgotten how to be yourself. When was the last time you pursued something that was just for you? When was the last time you had a dream that didn't involve this house, or our social standing. She looked at me with red-rimmed eyes, and for a moment I thought I saw a flicker of recognition in her gaze, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by the defensive posture I had come to know so well. "Don't try to turn this around on me," she snapped. "Don't try to make it seem like I'm the one with the problem when you're the one asking for a divorce. I offered you a solution, and you rejected it. That makes this your fault, not mine." I sighed, feeling the exhaustion of years pressing down on my shoulders. This isn't about fault. This isn't about winning or losing. This is about two people who grew apart and refused to acknowledge it until it was too late to do anything about it. "It's not too late," she insisted, reaching across the table to grab my hand. Her fingers were cold, trembling. "We can still fix this. We can go to counseling. We can take a vacation. We can do whatever it takes. Just please, don't give up on us." I looked down at her hand in mine, at the diamond ring I had slipped on her finger 15 years ago when I believed our love would last forever. The ring was still as beautiful as the day I bought it, but everything it represented had tarnished beyond recognition. "I'm not giving up," I said, gently extracting. "I'm acknowledging reality, and the reality is that we want different things from this marriage. You want stability, security, the comfort of routine. I want passion, connection, a partner who lights up when I walk into a room. Neither of us is wrong for wanting what we're just wrong for each other." The words seemed to break something, and she dissolved into fresh tears. I sat there watching her cry, feeling strangely detached from the scene unfolding before me. Perhaps I had done all my grieving in private, in the quiet moments when I lay awake at night wondering where my marriage had gone wrong. Perhaps I had simply run out of tears to shed for something that had died so long ago. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice hoarse from crying. "I don't know," I admitted. "I haven't thought that far ahead. I just know that I can't keep living like this, pretending that everything is fine when we both know it's not. I need to find out who I am without this marriage, and maybe you do too." She shook her head violently. "I know who I am. I'm your wife. That's who I am." And in that single statement, I heard the confirmation of everything I had suspected. She had lost herself so completely in the role of being married to me that she had no identity left to fall back on. The thought should have made me pity her, and perhaps on some level it did, but mostly it just made me sad. For her, for me, for the life we might have had if we had been brave enough to be honest with each other years ago. The days following our confrontation were among the longest of my life. Corinne and I moved around each other like strangers sharing a boarding house, speaking only when necessary and avoiding eye contact whenever possible. The tension in our home was suffocating, a physical presence that seemed to fill every room and corner. I had moved my things into the guest bedroom on the second floor, a small but comfortable space that I had converted into a home office years ago. The narrow bed against the wall was a far cry from the king-sized mattress I had shared with Corinne, but somehow I found myself sleeping better than I had in years. Perhaps it was the relief of finally acknowledging the truth of our situation, or perhaps it was simply the absence of the cold shoulder that had become my nightly companion. But sleep, when it came, was fitful and plagued by dreams that left me unsettled. I dreamed of Corinne as she had been when we first met, young and vibrant and full of life. I dreamed of our wedding day, of the tears in her eyes as she promised to love me forever. And I dreamed of the slow, insidious way our love had faded, like a photograph left too long in the sun until all the colors bled away. On the third night after my proposal of divorce, I woke at 3 a.m. to the sound of crying. At first, I thought it was part of my dream, a residue of the emotional turmoil that had been churning through my subconscious. But as I lay there in the darkness, listening, I realized the sound was coming from down the hall. Corinne was in our bedroom, her bedroom now, I supposed, sobbing with an intensity that made my chest ache despite everything. I lay there for a long moment, torn between the desire to comfort her and the knowledge that my presence would likely make things worse. In the end, I chose to stay where I was, staring at the ceiling and trying to block out the sound of her grief. Was I doing the right thing? The question had been haunting me since the words left my mouth. 15 years of marriage, countless shared memories, all the plans we had made together. Was I really willing to throw all of that away because my wife had lost the ability to express her love? But even as I asked myself these questions, I knew that the answer was yes, because the alternative was worse. The alternative was spending the rest of my life in a loveless marriage, going through the motions of a partnership that existed only on. The alternative was dying by degrees, watching the last remnants of my hope and passion wither away until I was nothing but a shell of the man I had once been. I thought about my parents, about the marriage they had shared for 47 years before my father. They had argued, certainly. They had gone through rough patches like any couple, but even in their worst moments, there had been an underlying current of love and respect that neither of them ever lost. When my father looked at my mother, even after decades of marriage, I could still see the admiration in his eyes, the gratitude that she had chosen him. When was the last time Corinne had looked at me? I searched my memory, trying to pinpoint a moment in recent years when I had caught that spark of genuine affection in her gaze. But every memory I conjured was faded, washed out, like those sun-bleached photographs from my dreams. The crying from down the hall eventually subsided, replaced by a silence that was somehow even more oppressive. I turned onto my side, pulling the covers up to my chin, and tried to empty my mind of all the thoughts that were threatening to overwhelm me. Tomorrow, I would need to take practical steps. I would need to consult a lawyer, discuss the division of our assets, figure out where I would live once this house was sold. These were the mundane details of ending a marriage, the bureaucratic requirements that transformed a once sacred union into a series of legal transactions. The thought filled me with a weariness that went bone deep, but beneath the exhaustion, I felt something else, a tiny ember of hope that I hadn't even realized I still possessed. Hope that somewhere on the other side of all this pain, there was a life waiting, a life where I could be myself without apology, where I could seek out the kind of connection I had always craved. Maybe I would find it with someone else. Or maybe I would find it in the simple act of rediscovering who I was as an individual. Either way, it had to be better than this endless gray existence I had been trudging through for so long. The next morning, I woke to the smell of coffee brewing downstairs. For a moment, I lay there in confusion, wondering if I had imagined the past few days. But then reality came rushing back, and I steeled myself for another day of navigating the minefield that my life had. I found Corinne in the kitchen, standing at the counter with her back to me. She was wearing the silk robe I had given her for our 10th anniversary, and her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail. She didn't turn but I saw her shoulders tense at the sound of my footsteps. "I made coffee," she said, her voice carefully. "There's also toast if you want it." "Thank you," I replied, reaching for a mug from the cabinet. "That's kind of you." She turned then, and I was struck by how tired she looked. Dark circles ringed her eyes, and her face was drawn and pale. Whatever sleep she had managed to get had clearly not been restful. "I've been thinking," she said, clasping her hands in front of her as though to keep them from shaking, "about what you said, about how I've been treating you." I poured my coffee and waited, giving her the space to continue at her own pace. "You were right about some things," she admitted, and I could tell how much the words cost her. "I have been distant. I have been treating our marriage like something to be managed rather than something to be cherished, and I'm sorry for that, Garrett. I truly am." I took a sip of my coffee, considering her words. "Thank you for saying that. It means more than you know. But I don't think divorce is the answer," she pressed on, a note of desperation creeping into her voice. "I think we've both made mistakes, and I think we both need to work harder at this. What if we tried counseling? What if we really committed to fixing what's broken between us?" I had expected this, had in fact been preparing for it since I woke up. "Corinne, we've talked about counseling before. You've always found reasons to avoid it. What makes this time different?" "Because this time, I know what's at stake," she said, her eyes filling with tears. "This time I understand that if I don't change, I'm going to lose you, and I don't want to lose you, Garrett. Despite everything, despite all the ways I've failed you, I still love you." The words hung in the air between us, and I wished I could believe them. I wished I could take them at face value and use them as a foundation for rebuilding what we had lost. But after years of empty promises and half-hearted attempts at connection, I had lost the ability to trust her declarations. "Do you?" I asked softly. "Do you really love me, Corinne? Or do you love the life we've built together?" Because from where I'm standing, those are two very different things. Against my better judgment, I agreed to try counseling. Perhaps it was the remnants of my vows tugging at my conscience. Or perhaps it was simply the desire to leave no stone unturned before walking away from my marriage forever. Whatever the reason, I found myself sitting in a waiting room 2 weeks later, flipping through an outdated magazine while Corinne fidgeted nervously beside me. The counselor's name was Dr. Vivian Thorne, a woman in her early 60s with silver hair cropped close to her head and sharp blue eyes that seemed to see right through you. Her office was decorated in soothing earth tones, with comfortable chairs arranged around a low coffee table and abstract paintings adorning the walls. It was designed to put patients at ease, but I felt anything but relaxed as I settled into my seat. "Thank you both for coming," Dr. Thorne said, her voice warm, professional. "I understand this isn't easy, and I appreciate your willingness to work on your relationship. Before we begin, I'd like to establish some ground rules. This is a safe space for both of you to express your feelings without judgment. I ask that you listen to each other without interrupting, and that you speak from your own experience using I statements rather than accusation." Corinne nodded eagerly, like a student determined to impress her teacher. I simply waited, curious to see how this would unfold. "Let's start with what brought you here today," Dr. Thorne continued. "Garrett, would you like to begin?" I took a deep breath, organizing my thoughts. "I asked for a divorce a few weeks ago. My wife offered to be physically available to me whenever I wanted, as a way to save our marriage, and I realized in that moment that our problems went much deeper than physical intimacy. We've grown apart over the years, and I'm not sure we can find our way back to each other. Dr. Thorne nodded, her expression neutral. And how did that make you feel when Corinne made that offer? Empty, I said after a moment's consideration, and sad, because it confirmed what I had been suspecting for a long time, that she sees our marriage as a transaction rather than a partnership. The offer wasn't about reconnecting, it was about maintaining her position. I felt Corinne stiffen beside me, and I knew she was fighting the urge to interrupt. To her credit, she remained silent, her hands clenched in her lap. Corinne, Dr. Thorne said, turning her attention to my wife, how did you experience that moment? What were you hoping to accomplish with your offer? Corinne's voice was thick with emotion when she spoke. I was trying to show him that I was willing to change, that I understood what he needed from me. I thought that if I could give him what he wanted physically, the emotional connection would follow. I didn't mean for it to come across as transactional. But that's how Garrett experienced it, Dr. Thorne pointed out gently. Can you understand why he might have felt that way? There was a long pause, but answered. I suppose so. But it wasn't I love my husband. I've always loved him. I just don't know how to show it any. Dr. Thorne leaned forward, her eyes moving between us. That's an important admission, Corinne, and it suggests that the issues in your marriage are rooted in communication and emotional expression, rather than a lack of love. Would you agree with that assessment? I considered the question carefully. I'm not sure anymore. There was a time when I believed Corinne loved me, but over the years, that love seemed to fade until I couldn't recognize. Now, when she says she loves me, I don't know if she's expressing a genuine feeling or just saying what she thinks she should say. The words were harsh, but they were honest. Dr. Thorne nodded thoughtfully, then turned back to Corinne. How does it feel to hear your husband express doubt about your love for him? Tears began to slide down Corinne's cheeks. It's devastating, because I do love him. I know I haven't shown it well, but the feeling is there. It's always been there. Feelings are important, Dr. Thorne acknowledged. But in a marriage, actions speak louder than words. Can you think of specific ways you've demonstrated your love for Garrett in the past year? The silence that followed was deafening. I watched Corinne's face as she searched her memory, her expression growing increasingly distressed as she struggled to find examples. Finally, she shook her head, a sob escaping her. I don't know, she whispered. I can't think of anything specific. I've been so focused on maintaining the house, on my social commitments, on the logistics of our life together, that I forgot to actually be a wife. I forgot to show him that he matters to me. It was the most honest thing she had said in years, and I felt something shift inside me. Not a return of the love I had lost, but perhaps a softening of the anger and resentment that had been building for so long. Dr. Thorne seemed to sense the change in atmosphere. This is a breakthrough, Corinne. Acknowledging where you've fallen short is the first step toward making meaningful changes. But acknowledgement alone isn't enough. You need to take concrete actions to demonstrate your love and commitment. I will, Corinne said urgently. I'll do whatever it takes. Just tell me what to do. Dr. Thorne smiled gently. That's not something I can tell you. The gestures need to come from you, based on your knowledge of your husband and what matters to him. But we can work together to explore possibilities and develop strategies for reconnection. She turned to me. Garrett, I'd like to ask you something. If Corinne were to make genuine changes, not superficial gestures, but real, meaningful efforts to reconnect with you emotionally, would you be willing to give the marriage another chance? I sat with the question for a long moment. Part of me wanted to say no, to hold on to the certainty I had felt when I first asked for the divorce. But another part of me, the part that still remembered falling in love with the woman sitting beside me, wasn't ready to close that door entirely. I don't know, I finally. I want to say yes, but I've been disappointed so many times that I'm afraid to hope. If she can show me, over time, that she genuinely wants to be my partner, and not just my wife in name only, then maybe. But I need to see sustained effort, not just a burst of enthusiasm that fades after weeks. Dr. Thorne nodded. That's fair. Trust takes time to rebuild, and Garrett has every right to be cautious. Corinne, are you prepared to make a long-term commitment to this process, knowing that there are no guarantees? Corinne reached over and took my hand. For the first time in longer than I could remember, the gesture didn't feel hollow or performative. Yes, she said, her voice steady despite the tears on her cheeks. I'm prepared to do whatever it takes, for as long as it takes. I don't want to lose him. As we left Dr. Thorne's office that afternoon, I felt the first tentative stirrings of something that might have been hope. It was fragile, easily shattered, but it was there. Whether it would survive the challenges ahead remained to be seen. The weeks that followed our first counseling session were a study in contrast. On the surface, our lives continued much as they had before. I went to work. Corinne managed the household. We ate dinner together in mostly comfortable silence. But beneath that familiar routine, something was shifting, slowly and tentatively. True to her word, Corinne began making efforts. Small ones at first, a fresh pot of coffee waiting for me when I came downstairs in the morning, a handwritten note tucked into my briefcase, a question about my day that seemed to carry genuine interest behind. These gestures were so foreign after years of emotional distance that I found myself unsure how to respond. Part of me wanted to embrace them, to reward her efforts with enthusiasm and encouragement, but another part held back, waiting for the other shoe to drop, waiting for her to revert to the cold stranger I had grown accustomed to. Dr. Thorne had warned me this. Your walls didn't go up overnight, she had said during one of our sessions, and they won't come down overnight either. Be patient with yourself and with Corinne. Healing takes time. I was trying. I really was. But every time Corinne made a gesture of affection, I found myself analyzing it, searching for hidden motives, wondering if it was genuine or just another performance designed to maintain the status quo. The suspicion was exhausting, and I hated myself for being unable to let it go. One evening, about a month into our counseling, I came home to find something unexpected. The house was dark except for the dining room, where candles flickered on the table and soft music played from somewhere in the background. The table was set with our good china, the set we only used for special occasions, and the aroma of something delicious wafted from the kitchen. Corinne emerged wearing a dress I hadn't seen in years, a deep blue number that had always been one of my favorites. Her hair was down, falling in soft waves around her shoulders, and she had applied makeup with a careful hand that accentuated her natural beauty. I hope you're hungry, she said, a nervous smile playing at the corners of her lips. I made your favorite, beef bourguignon with crusty bread and roasted vegetable, and there's chocolate mousse for dessert. I stood in the doorway, momentarily speechless. This was the woman I had married, the one who used to surprise me with elaborate dinners and romantic evenings. I had thought she was gone forever, lost to the distance that had grown between us. But here she was, standing in our dining room, offering me a glimpse of what we had once had. This is incredible, I managed, setting down my briefcase and walking toward her. When did you have time to do all this? I took the day off from my volunteer work, she said, her cheeks flushing slightly. I wanted to do something special for you. I know I've been neglecting you for years, and I wanted to show you that I remember how to be a good wife when I put my mind to it. We sat down to dinner, and for the first time in longer than I could remember, we talked. Really talked, not just exchanged pleasantries about the weather or household matters. We talked about our hopes for the future, about memories from our early days together, about the small moments that had made us fall in love in the first place. I learned things about Corinne that night that I had never known or had forgotten. I learned about the insecurities that had been plaguing her as she approached 50, about her fear of losing her looks and her relevance. I learned about the resentment she had been harboring toward me for working such long hours, for not being present even when I was physically in the house. I learned that her emotional withdrawal hadn't been a deliberate choice, but a gradual defense mechanism against the loneliness she had been. I should have told you all this years ago, she said, her eyes glistening, but I didn't know how to start the conversation, and you seemed so wrapped up in your work that I didn't think you would listen anyway. So I kept it all inside, and it festered until I didn't even recognize myself anymore. I reached across the table and took her hand. I'm sorry too. I got so focused on providing for us financially that I forgot to provide emotionally. I thought that if I worked hard enough, earned enough money, you would be happy. I didn't realize that what you needed was my time and attention, not my paycheck. We both made mistakes, she said softly, but maybe it's not too late to fix them. That night, we made love for the first time in over a year. Not the obligatory mechanical coupling that our intimate life had become, but something tender and passionate and real. Afterward, we lay in each other's arms, and I felt a connection that I had thought was lost forever. I've missed this, Corinne whispered against my chest. Not just the physical part, but the closeness. The feeling that we're on the same team. I've missed it too, I admit. I just didn't know how to get it back. Maybe we're getting it back now, she said, tilting her face up to look at me. Maybe this is our second chance. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to embrace this rekindled connection and use it as a foundation for rebuilding our marriage. But even as I held her in my arms, that small, suspicious voice in the back of my mind refused to be silenced. Was this real? Or was it just another desperate attempt to save her comfortable life? Only time would tell. For 3 months, things were better than they had been in years. Corinne continued her efforts, and I began to lower my walls, allowing myself to believe that we might actually salvage our marriage. We went on dates again. Actual dates. Not just obligatory appearances at social functions. We took a weekend trip to the Oregon coast, staying in a charming bed and breakfast where we spent hours walking on the beach and talking about everything and nothing. I began to remember why I had fallen in love with her in the first place. Her intelligence, her wit, the way her eyes crinkled when she laughed. The woman I had married was still in there, buried beneath years of disappointment and distance, and she was slowly emerging back into the light. But then came the evening that changed everything. I arrived home from work to find Corinne on the phone in the living room, her voice low and urgent. She didn't hear me come in, and I stood in the hallway listening to her side of the conversation. I know, but things are different now. No, he doesn't suspect any. I'm doing everything I can to make him happy, and it seems to be working. Once this is over, we can go back to normal. My blood ran cold. The words could have meant any number of things, but in that moment, my worst fears crystallized into a single, devastating conclusion. She was playing me. All the dinners, the romantic gestures, the emotional vulnerability, it was all an act designed to keep me in the marriage until she achieved whatever goal she had set for herself. I must have made some sound because Corinne suddenly whirled around, her face going pale when she saw me standing there. "Garrett," she said, quickly ending her call. "How long have you been standing there?" "Long enough," I replied, my voice flat. "Who were you talking to?" "It was just my sister," she said, but her eyes darted away from mine, a telltale sign that she was lying. "We were discussing a surprise party for our mother's birthday." "Your mother's birthday isn't for another 6 months," I pointed out. The color drained from her face. "I know, but Evelyn wanted to start planning early." "Stop!" The word came out sharper than I intended, but I couldn't bring myself to soften it. "Just stop lying to me." "I heard what you said. He doesn't suspect anything. Once this is over, we can go back to normal." "What does that mean? What are you hiding from me?" She stood there, frozen, and I could see her calculating how much to reveal. It was that calculation, more than anything else, that broke something inside me. Even now, even after months of supposed progress, her first instinct was to deceive, rather than to be honest. "Fine," I said when she remained silent. "Don't tell me, but I want you to know that whatever trust we had rebuilt over the past few months is gone. You've just confirmed everything I feared, that this reconciliation was never real, that you were just telling me what I wanted to hear to keep me from leaving." "No," she cried, finally finding her voice. "That's not true, Garrett. The reconciliation was real. My feelings for you are real. There's something I haven't told you, something I was afraid to share because I thought it would push you away." "Then tell me now," I demand. "No more secrets. No more lies. If you want any chance of saving this marriage, you need to be completely honest with me." She took a deep breath, and when she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I've been talking to a financial advisor about protecting my assets in case we do get divorced." The admission hit me like a physical blow. All the romantic gestures, all the emotional vulnerability, all the progress we had, and she had been consulting with a financial advisor behind my back, planning for the failure of our marriage, even as she claimed to be fighting for its survival. "When did this start?" I asked, struggling to keep my voice steady. "A few weeks after you first asked for the divorce," she admitted. "I was scared. I didn't know if the counseling would, and I wanted to make sure I would be okay if it." "So everything you did, the dinners, the conversations, the weekend getaway, that was all just insurance? A way to hedge your bets while you protected yourself financially?" "No," she insisted, reaching for me. I stepped back, avoiding her touch. The feelings were real. Everything I shared with you was real. The financial planning was just a safety net, something I needed to feel secure. "Do you have any idea how that sounds?" I asked, my voice rising despite my best efforts to control it. "You were so busy protecting yourself from the possibility of our marriage failing that you guaranteed its failure. How am I supposed to trust you now? How am I supposed to believe anything you say?" She was crying now, tears streaming down her face. "I'm sorry. I know I should have told. I know it looks bad, but I was scared, Garrett. I've never been on my own. The thought of losing everything, the house, our life together, everything I've worked for, it terrified me." "Everything you've worked for," I repeated bitterly. "Not everything we've worked for. Everything you've worked for." "Do you hear yourself, Corinne? Even now, even when you're begging me to understand, it's all about you, your security, your fears, your needs. When do my needs factor into this equation?" She had no answer for that. She just stood there, crying, as all the progress we had made crumbled to dust around us. I spent the night in the guest room again, staring at the ceiling, and trying to make sense of everything that had happened. Part of me wanted to pack my bags and leave immediately, to wash my hands of this marriage and start fresh somewhere else. But another part, the part that had dared to hope over the past few months, wasn't ready to give up just yet. The next morning, I called Dr. Thorne and requested an emergency session. She agreed to see us that afternoon, and I drove Corinne to her office in tense silence. "I'm glad you called," Dr. Thorne said as we settled into our usual seats. "Setbacks are a normal part of and it's important to address them promptly, rather than letting them fester." I recounted what had happened the previous evening, the overheard conversation, the revelation about the financial advisor, the destruction of the trust we had been rebuilding. Dr. Thorne listened without interrupting, her expression thoughtful. "Corinne," she said I'd like to hear your perspective on this. Help me understand what you were thinking and feeling when you decided to consult a financial advisor." Corinne took a shaky breath. I was terrified. When Garrett asked for the divorce, my whole world fell apart. I didn't know who I was without him, without our marriage. The financial planning wasn't about not trusting him. It was about trying to create some sense of security in a situation that felt completely. But you chose to keep it secret from Garrett, Dr. Thorne pointed out. Why was that? Because I knew how it would look. I knew he would think exactly what he thinks now, that I was hedging my bets, that my efforts at reconciliation weren't genuine. But that's not the truth. The reconciliation was real. I was just scared. Dr. Thorne turned to me. Garrett, how does it feel to hear Corinne's explanation? It feels like more of the same, I said honestly. Every time I start to trust her, something happens to remind me why I shouldn't. The pattern is always the same. She does something that hurts me. She has a seemingly reasonable explanation. She promises to do better, and then she does something else that hurts me. At what point do I stop giving her the benefit of the doubt and accept that this is just who she is? That's a question only you can answer, Dr. Thorne replied. Before you make that decision, I think it's important to dig deeper into what's really driving Corinne's behavior. Corinne, you've mentioned several times that you're scared of being on your own. Can you tell me more about that fear? Corinne was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was small, almost childlike. I've never been alone. I went from living with my parents, to living with roommates in college, to living with Garrett. I've always had someone to take care of me, someone to tell me I was okay. The thought of being on my own, having to make all my own decisions, relying only on myself, it's paralyzing. And when Garrett asked for the divorce, those fears came rushing to the surface, Dr. Thorne said. Instead of addressing them directly, you tried to manage them through financial planning and through doing whatever you thought would keep Garrett in the marriage. Yes, Corinne whispered. I know it was wrong. I know I should have been honest with him, but I didn't know how to explain something I barely understood myself. Dr. Thorne leaned forward. Corinne, I think we've hit on something important. Your fear of being alone isn't just about the divorce. It's a deeper issue that has probably been affecting your marriage for years. When you withdrew emotionally from Garrett, was it because you were punishing him for something? Or was it because you were afraid of being too dependent on? Corinne's eyes widened as though a light had suddenly turned on. The second one, she breathed. I was terrified of needing him too much, of being so dependent on him that I would fall apart if anything ever happened to our marriage. So I pulled away, tried to create some emotional distance, tried to convince myself that I could survive without him. But all I did was create a self-fulfilling prophecy. It was a revelation, both for her and for me. All these years, I had assumed that her emotional withdrawal was a sign that she didn't love me anymore. But what if it was actually a sign that she loved me too much? So much that it frightened her. The insight didn't excuse her behavior, but it did help explain it. And for the first time, I saw a path forward that didn't involve simply walking away. I took 2 weeks away from home. Not a separation in the formal sense, but a period of reflection that I desperately needed. I stayed with my brother Owen in San Francisco, sleeping in his guest room, and spending my days walking along the waterfront, trying to sort through the chaos of my thoughts and emotions. Owen was a good listener. He let me talk without interrupting, without offering solutions or advice. He simply sat with me in my pain, and that was exactly what I needed. You know what strikes me about this whole situation? He said one evening as we sat on his balcony, watching the sun set over the bay. You've spent so much time analyzing Corinne's feelings and motivations that you've barely mentioned your own. What do you want, Garrett? Not what you think you should want. Not what society says you should want. What does your heart actually want? It was a question I had been avoiding, perhaps because I was afraid of the answer. But sitting there with my brother, watching the sky turn shades of orange and pink, I finally allowed myself to be honest. I want to be loved, I said simply. Not tolerated, not accommodated, not managed, just loved. I want someone who looks at me and sees their partner, their best friend, their home. I want to feel like I matter, not like I'm just a means to an end. And can Corinne give you that? Owen asked. I don't know. I thought she could once. Now I'm not sure of anything anymore. Owen nodded thoughtfully. Here's something to consider. You've been so focused on what Corinne has or hasn't done that you might be missing the bigger picture. Marriage isn't a transaction where you give love and receive love in equal measure. It's messy and complicated and often unfair. Sometimes you give more than you get, and sometimes you get more than you give. The question isn't whether Corinne is perfect. She's clearly not. The question is whether you're willing to do the hard work of building something real with an imperfect person. But how do I know if she's willing to do the same? I asked. You don't, Owen said with a shrug. That's the risk you take in any relationship. You put your heart out there and hope for the best. Sometimes it works out, and sometimes it doesn't. But the alternative, closing yourself off to protect yourself from getting hurt, that's no way to live. I thought about his words during the long drive back to Portland 2 weeks later. He was right, of course. I had been so focused on protecting myself from further disappointment that I had lost sight of why I wanted the divorce in the first place. It wasn't because Corinne was incapable of love, it was because I had given up on the possibility of receiving it. But what if I hadn't exhausted all the possibilities? What if, beneath all her fears and insecurities, there was still a woman who genuinely wanted to be my partner? Was I willing to give her one more chance, knowing that she might disappoint me again? By the time I pulled into our driveway, I had made my decision. I was going to try one more time, not because I was confident it would work, but because I owed it to myself and to the vows I had made 15 years ago to give it everything I had before walking away. The conversation we had that night was unlike any we had ever had before. There were no accusations, no defenses, no carefully constructed arguments designed to win points. Instead, there was just honesty, raw, uncomfortable, necessary honesty. I told Corinne about my time in San Francisco, about the conversations with Owen that had helped me see our situation more clearly. I told her about my fear of being unlovable, about the ways I had contributed to the distance between us by burying myself in work and refusing to be emotionally vulnerable. I told her that I was willing to try again, but only if we could both commit to complete honesty going forward. Corinne, in turn, shared things she had never shared before. She told me about her childhood, about a mother who had taught her that a woman's worth was determined by her husband's success, about the pressure she had felt to be perfect in every way. She told me about the shame she had carried for years, the feeling that she was a failure as a wife because she couldn't make me happy. She told me that her emotional withdrawal hadn't been a rejection of but a protection against the devastating loss she feared would come if she allowed herself to truly depend on someone. "I've spent my whole life trying to control everything," she said, tears streaming, "because if I'm in control, then nothing can hurt me. But all I did was push away one person I want. I'm so sorry, Garrett. I'm so sorry for all the ways I've hurt." I took her hands in mine, feeling the trembling of her fingers. "I'm sorry too. I should have tried harder to understand what you were going through. I should have been more patient, more present. I let my own insecurities blind me to your—" "What do we do now?" she asked. "We start over," I said. "Not from scratch, but from here. We take everything we've learned and use it to build something better. It won't be easy and there will be setbacks. But if we're both committed, truly committed, I believe we can make this work." That night, we didn't just reconcile, we reconnected. For the first time in years, I felt like I was seeing the real Corinne, not the carefully constructed facade she had been showing the world, but the vulnerable, frightened, desperately loving woman beneath. And I let her see the real me, the man who was terrified of being alone but even more terrified of being in a marriage that felt like loneliness. We didn't solve all our problems that night. We didn't suddenly transform into the perfect couple with no issues or conflict, but we established a foundation of honesty and vulnerability that we had been missing for far too long. And that foundation, I began to believe, might be enough to rebuild a— The months that followed were the hardest work I had ever done in my life. Rebuilding a marriage, I discovered, was far more difficult than building one in the first place. When you start fresh, you have the luxury of ignorance. You don't know all the ways your partner might hurt you, all the patterns they might fall into, all the vulnerabilities you might need to navigate. But when you rebuild, you do so with full knowledge of every wound that has been inflicted, every disappointment that has been suffered. Corinne and I continued our sessions with Dr. Thorne, and the work we did in that office spilled over into every aspect of our life. We learned to communicate more effectively, to express our needs without accusation, and to listen without defensiveness. We developed rituals of connection, a weekly date night that was sacred, a morning coffee together before the day began, a few minutes each evening to share the highs and lows of our day. But the changes weren't just behavioral, they were deeper than that, touching on the very foundations of who we were as individuals and as a couple. I learned to be more present, to prioritize my marriage over my career in ways I had never done before. Corinne learned to be more vulnerable, to share her fears and insecurities instead of hiding behind a mask of competence. There were setbacks, times when old patterns reasserted themselves, and we found ourselves slipping back into the distance that had nearly destroyed us. But each time, we caught ourselves earlier and recovered more quickly. We were learning, slowly but surely, how to be partners instead of just spouses. One evening, about 8 months into our reconciliation, Corinne asked me a question that stopped me in my tracks. "Do you think we would have made it if you hadn't asked for the divorce?" I considered the question carefully. "No," I finally admitted. "I think we would have continued drifting apart until there was nothing left to salvage." The divorce ultimatum was a wake-up call for both of us. It forced us to confront issues we had been avoiding for years. So in a way, asking for the divorce saved our marriage. In a way, although I wouldn't recommend it as a general strategy. She laughed at a genuine, full-throated laugh that reminded me of the woman I had fallen in love with all those years. It was a sound I had thought I might never hear again, and hearing it now filled me with a gratitude so profound it brought tears to my eyes. "I love you, Garrett," she said, reaching over to squeeze my hand. "I know I haven't always shown it, and I know I have a lot more work to do, but I want you to know that my love for you is real. It's always been. I know, I said softly. I love you too. On the 15th anniversary of our marriage, we renewed our vows. It wasn't a large affair, just family and close friends gathered in the backyard of the home we had shared for so many years. But the intimacy of the event made it more meaningful, not less. I remember standing under the arbor we had decorated with white roses and looking at Corinne as she walked toward. She was wearing a simple ivory dress, and her hair was swept up in a style that reminded me of our wedding day. But the woman walking toward me wasn't the same woman I had married 15 years ago. She was stronger, more self-aware, more capable of genuine vulnerability. The journey we had taken together had transformed her, and it had transformed me as well. When it came time to say my vows, I spoke from the heart. Corinne, I began, my voice thick with emotion. 15 years ago, I stood before you and promised to love you for better or for worse. I had no idea then what those words really meant. I didn't understand that worse could mean years of distance and pain, or that better could mean the incredible journey we've taken to find our way back to each other. Today, I make that promise again, but with full knowledge of what it means. I choose you, not because you're perfect, but because you're perfectly imperfect, just like me. I choose you because the work we've done together has shown me that real love isn't a feeling that comes and goes. It's a choice we make every day, to show up for each other, to be honest with each other, to fight for each other even when it would be easier to walk away. I choose you, Corinne, today and every day for the rest of our lives. Corinne's eyes were glistening as she spoke her own vows. Garrett, I almost lost you. I almost threw away the best thing that ever happened to me because I was too afraid to be vulnerable, too scared to let you see the real me. But you didn't give up on us. Even when you asked for the divorce, you were really asking for us to be better. And I'm so grateful that I finally heard what you were saying. Today I promise to keep showing up, to keep being honest, to keep choosing you even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. You are my partner, my best friend, and my home. I love you more today than I ever have, and I will spend the rest of my life proving it. We exchanged rings, simple bands that we had chosen together, and sealed our renewed commitment with a kiss. Around us, our friends and family applauded, and I felt a sense of peace that I hadn't experienced in years. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. We would face challenges, conflicts, moments of doubt and fear, but we would face them together, armed with the tools and insights we had gained through our journey. And that, I realized, was what marriage was really about. Not the absence of problems, but the commitment to work through them together. 2 years have passed since we renewed our vows, and I am happy to report that our marriage is stronger than. It's not perfect, no marriage, but it's real in a way it never was before. We have learned to navigate our differences, to communicate our needs, to choose each other over and over again in the countless small decisions that make up a life together. Corinne has grown tremendously. She went back to school to pursue a degree in psychology, inspired by our experiences in counseling. She volunteers at a women's shelter, helping other women through their fears and insecurity. She has become, in many ways, the woman she was always meant to be, a woman who knows her own worth and doesn't need external validation to feel secure. I've grown too. I've learned to prioritize connection over achievement, to be present in my relationships instead of hiding behind my work. I took a step back from my career, accepting a less demanding position at the firm that allows me more time with Corinne and with the people who matter to me. It was a difficult decision, but it was the right one. Looking back on everything we've been through, I realized that the moment when I proposed divorce was actually the beginning of our real marriage. The 15 years before that were a prelude, a practice run that taught us what not to do. The real work began when we finally had the courage to be honest with each other about our needs, our fears, and our desires. Sometimes, late at night, Corinne will turn to me in bed and ask if I have any regrets. And I always give her the same answer. No regrets. Not anymore. Because the truth is, every moment of pain and confusion led us to where we are now. The distance taught us the value of closeness. The lies taught us the importance of truth. The fear of losing each other taught us to hold on more tightly. I used to think that a good marriage was one without problem, a smooth, seamless partnership where everything just worked. Now I know better. A good marriage is one where you face problems together, where you grow together, where you choose each other every day even when it would be easier not to. Corinne and I have that kind of marriage now, and I am grateful for it every single day. When she offered me intimacy whenever I wanted, I responded by proposing divorce. It seemed like the end at the time, but it was really a beginning. The start of a journey that would transform both of us and give us the marriage we had always dreamed of having. If you're reading this and you're in a marriage that feels hopeless, I want you to know that it doesn't have to be Sometimes the most broken things can be rebuilt into something stronger than they ever were before. It takes work, honesty, vulnerability, and a willingness to change. But if both partners are committed, anything is possible. Trust me, I know.